Seattle Police Training Facility, March 1970. The fluorescent lights hummed against the concrete walls of the Seattle Police Department's training facility, casting harsh shadows across the institutional green paint that had seen better decades. 43 officers sat in folding metal chairs arranged in uneven rows, the kind that left indentations in your back after 20 minutes. Their eyes carried the weight of skepticism earned through years of broken promises, community outreach programs that lasted 6 months, new procedures that worked fine on paper, consultants who'd never walked a beat. Most had been on the street long enough to know that real violence wasn't choreographed. It erupted from nowhere, fueled by desperation, drugs, or simple human meanness. It was ugly, quick, and left everyone involved a little more broken than before. Bruce Lee stood at the front of the room, smaller than most of them had expected. The publicity photos made him look larger somehow. At 130 pounds, he looked like he could be snapped in half by any veteran cop in the back row. His black slacks and white button-down shirt were unremarkable, almost professorial. No martial arts uniform, no ceremonial trappings. Just a man who moved with an economy of motion that suggested every gesture was deliberate. Detective Sergeant Ray Hutchins, 6'2", 220 pounds, 20 years on the force, shifted his bulk in his chair and felt the familiar ache in his lower back. 2 decades of wrestling drunks out of bars, chasing suspects through alleyways, and sitting in patrol cars had left their mark. He adjusted his gun belt and muttered to his partner, Officer Dave Martinez, "This is what the department's spending our training budget on." Martinez, younger and still optimistic enough to believe in improvement, shrugged. "Captain says the guy knows what he's talking about." "Yeah?" Hutchins kept his voice low. "Captain also said that sensitivity training would reduce complaints by 30%. How did that work out?" Around them, other conversations died as Lee moved to the center of the room. He didn't clear his throat or call for attention. He simply stood there, hands at his sides, and waited. The silence that followed felt different from the usual classroom quiet, more focused, somehow charged with potential. "Control," Lee said, his voice carrying easily through the room without amplification. The word hung in the air like a challenge. "Today, we discuss control, not of your opponent, of yourself." Hutchins suppressed a snort. He'd heard variations of this speech before, usually from administrators who'd never had to make a split-second decision between going home alive or letting some tweaker with a knife get close enough to open your throat. For 30 minutes, Lee demonstrated techniques that looked almost gentle. Joint locks that could disable without destroying. Pressure points that could incapacitate without leaving permanent damage. His movements were fluid, precise, but somehow restrained, as if he were holding back something much more dangerous beneath the surface. The officers watched with professional interest, taking notes, asking technical questions about grip and leverage. But Hutchins remained unconvinced. He'd seen plenty of martial artists who could dance around a compliant partner in a controlled environment, only to fall apart the moment real resistance entered the equation. The street taught different lessons than any dojo. During a brief pause, while Lee answered questions about legal liability, Hutchins found himself studying the instructor more carefully. There was something unsettling about the man's stillness. Most people fidgeted, shifted their weight, made unconscious adjustments to their posture. Lee stood like he'd grown roots, his breathing so controlled it was barely visible. When he moved, it was with the kind of precision Hutchins had only seen in surgeons and snipers, people who understood that the smallest miscalculation carried enormous consequences. "With respect, Mr. Lee," Hutchins called out, his voice cutting through the demonstration. The room went quiet. Even Martinez turned to look at him with a warning expression. This looks real nice in a classroom. But on the street, when some junkie's coming at you with a broken bottle and 30 seconds of PCP-fueled rage, you don't have time for pressure points. You put him down, hard, before he puts you down. Lee turned toward Hutchins, his expression unreadable. No flash of anger, no defensive posturing. Just that same unsettling calm. You believe in overwhelming force. I believe in going home alive, Hutchins shot back, feeling the attention of the entire room focused on him now. I've got a wife and 2 kids waiting for me. When it's me or him, I choose me. Every time. That's not philosophy. That's survival. Several officers nodded. Captain Morrison, sitting in the front row, looked uncomfortable, but didn't intervene. This was language they all understood, the brutal mathematics of survival that governed every shift, every call, every time they put on the badge. Lee was quiet for a long moment, as if considering something. When he spoke again, his voice was even softer than before. Show me. Hutchins felt his pulse quicken slightly. What? Show me how you would put me down. Hard. A low murmur rippled through the room. This wasn't part of any training protocol. Liability issues alone should have ended the conversation. Hutchins looked around, seeing his colleagues' faces, some curious, others worried about departmental consequences. Captain Morrison started to stand, probably to shut this down before it went too far. But Lee's calm gaze never wavered, and something in his posture suggested he wasn't making an idle challenge. I don't want to hurt you, Hutchins said, standing slowly. His knees popped audibly in the quiet room. You won't, Lee replied. The certainty in those 2 words was more unsettling than any threat would have been. Hutchins had faced down armed suspects, angry crowds, domestic disputes where everyone involved wanted to hurt someone. He understood rage, fear, desperation, all the emotions that drove people to violence. But this calm confidence was something else entirely. The 2 men faced each other in the center of the room. Hutchins had 4 inches and 90 pounds of advantage. His hands were scarred from 20 years of street fights, bar brawls, and domestic calls gone wrong. He'd put down men bigger than Lee with his nightstick and his fists. The weight of his service weapon, his backup piece, his baton, all the tools of controlled violence felt reassuring against his body. Just like that? Hutchins asked, still hoping someone would call this off. Just like that. Hutchins launched forward, committing fully to a right cross aimed at Lee's jaw. He was fast for a big man, faster than most suspects ever expected. His fist had ended dozens of fights, usually within the first few seconds. What happened next took less than 3 seconds, but every officer in that room would remember it for the rest of their careers. Lee moved like water around stone, not quickly, but with a fluid precision that made Hutchins's punch seem clumsy and predictable. The fist that should have connected instead found empty air. Hutchins felt his arm hyperextended, his shoulder joint screaming, as Lee's hands, gentle as a nurse guiding an elderly patient, redirected his momentum into a spiral that sent him crashing face first toward the concrete floor. But he didn't hit. At the last possible instant, Lee's left hand caught Hutchins's shirt. His right palm pressed against the detective's chest, and what should have been a bone-jarring impact became a controlled descent. Hutchins found himself on his knees, unharmed but completely off balance, staring at the floor he should have smashed into. The silence was absolute. Lee stepped back, his breathing unchanged. His white shirt wasn't even wrinkled. Around the room, 42 officers sat frozen, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. This wasn't a demonstration anymore. It was something else. A glimpse into a different way of thinking about power. Hutchins slowly got to his feet, his face flushed with embarrassment and something else. Confusion. In 20 years of police work, he'd developed a reliable sense of who could hurt him and how. But this had been different. Not violence exactly, but the controlled absence of violence. The suggestion of what could have happened. "Why?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "You had me. You could have—" "Could have what?" Lee interrupted gently. "Broken your arm? Shattered your skull? Put you in the hospital?" He paused, letting the implications settle. What would that prove? The room was absolutely silent now. Even the humming fluorescents seemed muted, as if the building itself was listening. "That I'm stronger?" Lee continued, his voice carrying easily in the stillness. "That I'm faster? That I can hurt you?" He shook his head almost sadly. "Any fool can break things, Sergeant Hutchins. It takes no skill to destroy. But to control the moment when you could destroy, to choose not to, that is power." Hutchins stared at him, feeling something shift in his understanding. "But on the street, you face the same choice I just faced," Lee said. "You can break things, or you can control them. One makes you a destroyer. The other makes you something more." He looked around the room slowly, meeting each officer's eyes in turn. When his gaze found Captain Morrison, Hutchins saw something pass between them. A recognition, perhaps, of what had just happened. "You carry weapons because you might need them," Lee continued, "but the most dangerous weapon you carry is your judgment about when not to use them." He walked back to the front of the room, leaving Hutchins standing in the center, still trying to process what had happened. The detective's shoulder ached where Lee had redirected his punch, but it was the kind of ache that came from overextension, not injury. A reminder of what could have been. "Questions?" Lee asked. There were none. 3 months later, Detective Sergeant Ray Hutchins was called to a domestic disturbance on Capitol Hill. The address was familiar. He'd been there twice before in the past year. Same couple, same pattern. Tommy Carver would get drunk, get high, or both, then take out his frustrations on whoever was closest. This time was different. Carver had barricaded himself in his apartment with his 8-year-old daughter after beating his wife unconscious. The woman was already on her way to Harborview Medical Center, her face a map of fresh bruises and old scars. Neighbors had called it in after hearing the screaming "stop," a silence more terrifying than the noise. When Hutchins kicked in the door, splinters of wood frame flying, he found Carver holding a kitchen knife to the little girl's throat. The man's eyes were wild, with the specific kind of paranoia that came from mixing amphetamines with bourbon. His hands shook, but not enough to make the blade any less dangerous. "Stay back!" Carver screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "I'll kill her! I swear to God I'll kill her!" The girl, Sarah, Hutchins remembered from previous calls, stood perfectly still in her father's grip. Her eyes were wide but dry. She'd learned not to cry when Daddy got like this. The old Hutchins would have drawn his weapon immediately, would have shouted commands, called for backup, established a perimeter, and escalated the situation into a forced choice between the girl's life and Carver's. The mathematics of survival. Sometimes you had to hurt one person to save another. Instead, Hutchins holstered his gun. The motion was deliberate, visible. He raised his hands, palms open, and took a half-step backward. "Tommy," he said quietly, his voice carrying the same careful control he'd heard in a police training facility 3 months earlier. "You don't want to hurt her." Carver's grip on the knife tightened. "Don't tell me what I want. You don't know what I want." But Hutchins could see something in the man's eyes, not just chemical rage, but genuine fear. Fear of what he might do. Fear of what he'd already done. Fear of the consequences that were already set in motion. For 43 minutes, Hutchins talked. Not commands or threats, but conversation. About being afraid. About making choices you can't take back. About the weight of destruction versus the strength required for control. He told Carver about his own father, a steel worker who'd drunk himself into daily rages. About learning that the biggest man in the room wasn't always the strongest. About how easy it was to break things and how much harder it was to fix them. The knife wavered. Sarah remained motionless, but Hutchins could see her breathing. Could see the trust in her eyes as she looked at him instead of at her father. "She loves you, Tommy," Hutchins said finally. "Even after everything, she still loves you. Don't make her stop." When Carver finally let the knife fall and collapsed sobbing to his knees, his daughter ran past Hutchins toward the hallway. As she passed him, she stopped and looked up with eyes too old for her 8-year-old face. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not hurting my daddy." Later, filling out his report in the harsh fluorescent light of the precinct, Hutchins thought about a small Chinese man who could have broken him in half, but chose instead to catch him when he fell. He thought about the moment when destruction became an option and how much strength it took to choose something else. He wrote in the file, "Suspect disarmed through verbal de-escalation. No force required." But in the margins, in his own handwriting, he added a note that would never make it into official records. "The master is not someone who always wins. The master is someone who knows when not to fight at all."